for 9 years. The Meridian sat in a decommissioned orbital shipyard above Earth, officially classified as a failed experiment. Unofficially forgotten by nearly everyone who had once championed its construction. It hadn't started that way. When Dr. Naomi Okonkwo first proposed the project to the Terran Defense Authority, the Meridian had been billed as humanity's answer to a threat every intelligence briefing insisted was coming eventually: contact and likely conflict with a spacefaring civilization possessing technology far beyond anything Earth had developed on its own. The ship had consumed nearly a decade of research, $400 billion in combined international funding, and the better part of Okonkwo's career, built around an experimental quantum phase weapons and propulsion system that, in early testing, had proven wildly unstable, prone to catastrophic energy bleed, and ultimately incapable of meeting even the most basic performance benchmarks the ISS Defense Authority had established. After 3 failed live-fire trials, the last of which had nearly killed its entire 70-person test crew when a phase drive containment failure vented plasma through 2 decks, the Terran Defense Authority quietly pulled the Meridian funding, reassigned its engineering staff to more conventional projects, and left the half-finished vessel drifting in orbital storage, a 4-kilometer monument to an idea that, by every official assessment, simply hadn't worked. Dr. Okonkwo never fully accepted that verdict. For 9 years, working with a skeleton crew of loyal engineers who believed, as she did, that the Meridian's core technology was sound and simply needed time nobody in the Defense Authority had been willing to give it, she continued refining the ship's systems in near-total obscurity, funded by a dwindling private research grant and her own considerable personal savings. By the time the Empire arrived, the Meridian was, in the strictest technical sense, still an unfinished prototype. It was also, though almost nobody alive yet understood this, the single most powerful warship in known space. The Skorath Imperium's arrival in Earth's solar system came without warning, without diplomatic overture, and without the faintest hesitation that might have suggested any uncertainty about the outcome. Grand Marshal Yevrik Doss, commanding an armada of 140 capital ships, had conquered 18 inhabited systems in his 40-year career, and had long since stopped regarding first contact with primitive, pre-interstellar species as anything requiring careful strategic consideration. Standard subjugation protocol. Doss ordered from the command deck of his flagship, the Empire's Reach, reviewing sensor data that confirmed everything Imperial scouts had reported in their earlier reconnaissance passes. A single inhabited world, technologically confined to its home system, possessing no meaningful orbital defense infrastructure, and no fleet capable of contesting Imperial control. Deploy the first wave. I want this system's resources flowing into Imperial supply lines within the week. What Doss's scouts had failed to detect, because the Meridian had spent 9 years running silent, its systems deliberately kept off every active sensor grid the Terran Defense Authority still monitored, was that Earth possessed exactly 1 vessel capable of meaningfully contesting Imperial control. And that vessel's small, dedicated crew had spent every one of those 9 quiet years preparing for precisely this moment, even after their own government had stopped believing it would ever come. Admiral Rosa Delgado, the Meridian Dar's commanding officer since its official decommissioning, received word of the Imperial Armada's arrival through back-channel military contacts, who still remembered and quietly respected what the old prototype represented. She found Dr. Okonkwo in the ship's engineering bay, running final diagnostics on the phase drive systems that had haunted the project's reputation for nearly a decade. "They're here," Delgado said. 140 ships, entering high orbit within 6 hours. Defense Authority has nothing capable of meaningfully slowing them down. Okonkwo didn't look up from her diagnostic terminal. Though her hands stilled briefly on the console, the phase drive stabilizers finished their final calibration 11 days ago. "We've run harmonic containment simulations across every failure scenario I could model. I believe we're ready. I can't promise you it's certain." 9 years, Dr. Delgado said. Nobody else believed this ship would ever fly again. I'm willing to bet on the 2 of us being right instead. The Terran Defense Authority, informed of the Meridian's continued existence only hours before the Skorath Armada's arrival, authorized its deployment with the particular desperation of officials who had spent 9 years dismissing a project they now had no better alternative to. Admiral Delgado's official orders were, in the final accounting, remarkably simple: engage the Imperial Armada by any means necessary, using a ship that official defense authority records still, technically, classified as a failed prototype. Grand Marshal Doss's forward scouts detected the Meridian launch from Earth's orbital shipyard with the mild dismissive curiosity of a fleet accustomed to encountering primitive, ultimately irrelevant resistance in the opening hours of any subjugation campaign. A single vessel, launching from what our surveys previously catalogued as a decommissioned shipyard, reported Doss's tactical officer, Vesa Korin, reviewing the emerging sensor profile with visible skepticism. Energy signature is unusual, Grand Marshal. Inconsistent with any propulsion architecture in our current database. Irrelevant, Doss said. One ship, regardless of its energy signature, poses no meaningful threat to an armada of this scale. Proceed with standard deployment. If this vessel attempts to interfere, destroy it and continue subjugation protocol without delay. It was, by every reasonable standard of imperial military doctrine, an entirely sound assessment. It was also catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. What followed, in the 4 hours that Grand Marshal Doss would later struggle to fully explain in his own final report to Imperial Command, represented something the Skorath Imperium's 40 years of uninterrupted conquest had never once required its commanders to consider. A single vessel, capable of meaningfully, decisively contesting an armada more than 100 times its own numerical strength. The Meridian quantum phase weapons system, the same technology that had spent 9 years being dismissed as an unstable, impractical failure, proved capable of something no Imperial engineer had ever encountered. Weapons fire that phased partially out of conventional space-time during transit, rendering it functionally immune to the Imperium's shielding technology, which had been designed, across 4 decades of refinement, entirely around intercepting and dispersing conventional energy weapons. Grand Marshal, the Empire's vigilance has lost all shield integrity, Korin reported, disbelief evident in her voice within the first 20 minutes of an engagement that should have ended, by every Imperial precedent, in the Meridian, swift and total destruction. Weapons fire is bypassing shielding entirely. I have no explanation for the targeting pattern, Grand Marshal. It should not be possible with any technology in our threat assessment database. Concentrate all available fire on a single target. Doss ordered, still operating under the assumption that sheer numerical superiority would eventually overwhelm whatever unconventional advantage this single vessel appeared to possess. One ship cannot withstand an entire armada, indefinitely, but the Meridian, phase drive propulsion, the very system whose instability had once nearly killed its test crew and ended the project entirely, now proved to be its single greatest defensive advantage. Dr. Okonkwo's 9 years of quiet, painstaking refinement had transformed what was once a catastrophic containment failure into a controlled, deliberate capability, the ability to phase the entire vessel partially out of conventional spacetime for brief, precisely timed intervals, rendering it effectively untouchable by conventional weapons fire during those windows, while its own quantum phase weapons remained fully capable of striking Imperial vessels that possessed no comparable defense. They're not simply resisting us, Korin reported, 90 minutes into an engagement that had already cost the Imperial Armada 11 capital ships without the Meridian sustaining a single confirmed hit. They're systematically dismantling our formation.
Grand Marshal.
Ship by ship, this is not the behavior of a primitive, pre-interstellar species. This is a coordinated, deliberate demonstration of capability we have no historical precedent for encountering. By the 3rd hour of the engagement, with more than 40 Imperial vessels destroyed or critically disabled, and the remainder of his armada showing clear signs of coordination breakdown, under a threat their entire doctrine had no framework to counter, Grand Marshal Doss found himself confronting a decision no commander in the Skorath Imperium's 40-year history of conquest had ever previously needed to make. Signal full withdrawal. Doss finally ordered. The words carrying a weight his own translation systems seemed to struggle rendering into the ceremonial formality of standard imperial communication protocol. All remaining vessels, immediate retreat to rally coordinates beyond the system's outer boundary. Admiral Delgado, monitoring the imperial retreat from the Meridian command deck, allowed herself a rare moment of genuine relief as the remaining 89 imperial vessels began their disorganized withdrawal from Earth's solar system. "They're running," she said, watching the tactical display clear of imperial contacts for the first time in 4 hours. "They're running because they've never encountered anything like this before." Dr. Okonkwo replied, exhaustion evident in her voice after 9 years of quiet, largely unsupported dedication to a project that had finally, decisively proven itself in the span of a single afternoon. An empire built on 40 years of uninterrupted conquest has no experience adapting to genuine resistance. "We didn't just defeat their armada, Admiral. We showed them something their entire military doctrine has no answer for." Grand Marshal Yevrik Doss's final report to Imperial High Command, delivered 3 weeks after the Meridian's decisive engagement above Earth, would become one of the most extensively studied military documents in the Skorath Imperium's subsequent history. Not for its account of tactical failure, which was thorough and unflinching, but for a single passage that Imperial strategists would spend years attempting to properly understand. "We assessed this world as primitive and undefended based on standard reconnaissance protocol." Doss wrote, "That assessment was catastrophically incomplete. A single vessel, built using technology our own scientific analysis suggests, was likely years, possibly a decade, ahead of anything currently deployed within Imperial territory, defeated an armada of 140 ships without sustaining meaningful damage. I do not believe this outcome reflects a fluke of circumstance. I believe it reflects a species willing to invest sustained, patient resources into technology that appeared, by every conventional measure, to have failed, and willing to continue that investment for years. After any reasonable military authority would have abandoned the project entirely. I recommend, in the strongest possible terms, that Earth be marked for extreme caution in any future strategic assessment, and that Imperial Command reconsider the assumption that technological superiority is measured solely by what a species has already proven, rather than what it has quietly continued refining, long after everyone else stopped watching. On Earth, in the aftermath of a battle that had reshaped humanity's understanding of its own capabilities almost overnight, the Terran Dead Defense Authority moved swiftly to formally reinstate the Meridian program, allocating resources and personnel at a scale Dr. Okonkwo had spent 9 frustrating years being denied. But when offered a prominent leadership role in the newly expanded program, she declined the ceremonial promotion, choosing instead to remain in the same engineering bay where she had spent nearly a decade refining a project everyone else had written off as a failure. "They're calling it a triumph now," she told Admiral Delgado, reviewing preliminary specifications for the next generation of phase drive vessels the Defense Authority had suddenly, urgently authorized. 9. Years ago they called it wasted funding and a dangerous liability. The ship didn't change in that time nearly as much as the willingness of everyone around it to keep believing in something that hadn't proven itself yet. Delgado considered this for a long moment before responding, "Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that we built something powerful enough to beat an empire's armada in a single afternoon. It's that the thing capable of doing that was sitting right here the entire time, quietly getting better, while almost everyone who should have been paying attention decided it wasn't worth watching anymore." News of the engagement spread quickly beyond Earth's own solar system, carried outward through the same intelligence networks the Skorath Imperium's fleeing armada had inadvertently alerted during its disorganized retreat. Within months, delegations from 3 other species living along the Imperium's contested border began quietly reaching out to Earth's Unified Defense Authority, seeking not immediate alliance, but simply confirmation of the rumor that had reached them, that a small, previously unremarkable world had faced an Imperial armada alone and sent it fleeing without losing a single ship of its own. Dr. Okonkwo found herself, somewhat reluctantly, becoming a symbol for exactly the kind of patient, unglamorous persistence she had always insisted mattered more than any single moment of dramatic success. She continued her work in the Meridian's engineering bay for years afterward, mentoring a new generation of engineers who arrived eager to work on humanity's flagship program. Many of them, she noted with quiet amusement, having no idea the project had once been considered such an embarrassing failure that its own creator had nearly lost her career defending it. Above Earth, the Meridian remained in orbit in the weeks that followed, no longer an ignored, half-finished prototype drifting in forgotten storage, but the founding vessel of a new generation of human starships. A quiet, permanent reminder that the difference between failure and breakthrough is sometimes measured not in the elegance of an idea's first attempt, but in the patience of the people who refuse to stop refining it. Long after everyone else has decided to look away,